Hey everyone, my name is NigelBarros, and in this video I'm going to be answering some questions I posted in the community page of YouTube for you all to ask me some questions. So I got a bunch and I'm going to answer about 15 of them in this video, so let's get to it. So this first one comes from Adventure TM, and he's asking about my opinion on 3 different lenses and which one I would choose: the 14mm f2.5, the 20mm f1.7, and the 25mm f1.7. Those are all Panasonic Micro Four Thirds lenses, and out of those 3 I would definitely pick the 20mm f1.7. I think that it's just a really easy to use focal length and super sharp. Out of the 3 of those, I think it's the sharpest. It's really fast and you can get it for a bargain these days, so that's the one that I would go with. So this one's by Richie Joshi. How do you compare the image quality between the Sony A6000 and the Canon SL2? Which one would you prefer for videography? Well, if the Canon SL2 has the same image quality as the 80D, then I would go with the Sony A6000. And from what I've seen, that's basically what it is. The SL2 is just a smaller 80D and they have the same image quality. And because of that, I would choose the A6000 because the A6000 I think has superior image quality to the 80D. It's super sharp, even though it shoots at like a lower megabit per second. The Sony A6000 footage is definitely superior to an 80D. So that's the camera that I would go with if I had to choose between those 2. So this next one is by Nicholas Waldvogel. Sorry if I'm pronouncing these names wrong, by the way. He says, "Hey man, is YouTube your main profession?" Well, I actually do YouTube and freelance filmmaking kind of part-time, and then my other part-time gig is I make skateboarding videos for a nonprofit skate ministry here in Portland. So that's what I do. This question is by Brandall Rector, and he's asking my opinion between 3 different gimbals, and honestly I haven't used any of these 3, the Ronin S, the Feotech AK4000, and the Moza Air 2. But out of those 3, I think the Moza Air 2 is probably the best bang for your buck. If money wasn't an object, I would go for the Ronin S. But again, I haven't really used any of those gimbals, so I can't really comment on them. So this next question is by Jeff Samel, and he's asking if I think the Sony A6000's 1080p is softer than the GH3, and which one do you think has more dynamic range? So I'm using the GH3 right now, and I've used the Sony A6000. I did a whole review on it. You can check that out right here. But honestly, it's very negligible as far as like which one is sharper and which one's softer. The A6000 has a bigger sensor, so you can get a shallower depth of field with that camera. The GH3 does shoot in more megabits per second, and it has a flip out screen, and it has a mic jack, which those are 3 things that the A6000 doesn't do. But I don't know, like, you know, sometimes I feel like picking up an A6000 just because I really liked how the image looked. It's one of my favorite 1080p images. So you can't really go wrong with the GH3 or the A6000 as far as like image quality goes. But if you want a more all-around video camera, I'd go for the GH3 just because it has the bells and whistles that you will be looking for when you're looking for like a video-centric camera. So this question is from Hannes Sassenberg, and he asks, what is your #1 trick with vintage lenses? And I don't buy vintage lenses too often, but when I do, I always look up the reviews and see how the image quality is. The vintage lenses that I usually buy, when I do buy them, are the Nikon AIS lenses. Those are usually the sharpest, and sometimes I get some highly recommended Canon FD lenses. And with those like vintage lenses, they're designed for, you know, 35mm film cameras, and so a lot of them are a little bit too tight for Micro Four Thirds, since it's a 2x crop in the field of view. So, you know, getting like a 50mm Nikon, it's gonna be like a 100mm field of view. So I do use focal reducers on them sometimes. The 2 focal reducers that I would suggest if you don't want to lose too much image detail and sharpness would be like the Viltrox Nikon focal reducer, and then the Medicon Zongni, I think, lens turbo. Those 2 are good and they still retain a lot of sharpness. So I would look at those 2 focal reducers if you wanted to pair them with some old vintage lenses. So this question is from Henrik Hagen, and he's asking about filming indoors while skateboarding, which often has bad lighting or too strong of lights. And I definitely have a lot of experience with this. So I would definitely say use the fastest lens that you have. Filming with kit lenses and then trying to bump the ISO up never looks good, especially under artificial lighting. And I definitely would say get your white balance right in camera. Don't try to fix it in post, because it's like really hard to get the skin tones right, and yeah, it's kind of a mess. So try to get your white balance right like in camera, and that's gonna save you a lot of time in the editing process. And again, just use fast lenses. Like I usually use like my f1.7 15mm filming indoors skating, and I'm about to pick up the 7 Artisans 7.5mm fisheye. That's 2.8, and I think that's like as slow as you want to go. You want to go 2.8 or faster when you're filming indoors, you know, because the lighting typically isn't bright enough for you to film at like, you know, f4 or something like that, especially with micro four thirds cameras. If you're filming with like, you know, a Sony A7 series camera or even like the Canon cameras, it's a lot easier to expose your image properly. But with micro four thirds, unless you're using like a GH5S, the high ISO isn't that great. So try to stick with your fastest lenses when you're filming in indoor skate parks. So this next question is from Eric and Miles, and they're asking what my opinion is on the Sony A6300. And I have used that camera before, and the main reason why I never actually picked it up and used it as like my main camera was the overheating issue and the fact that the 1080p is softer than the Sony A6000's 1080p, which is really frustrating. I travel down to Brazil a lot, and it's really hot down there, obviously, so I can't have a camera that's gonna be overheating a lot. And even the A6000 has overheated on me a couple of times here in Oregon, so I figure if the A6000 overheats here in Oregon, the A6300 is definitely gonna overheat in Brazil. So that's the main reason why I never actually got that camera and used it for a long period of time. It's just because, you know, the 4K is amazing, but the battery life is poor and it overheats, and the 1080p is softer than the A6000. So those are the reasons why I didn't get it. I know that there are some workarounds and some little, you know, hacks that you can do to make it not overheat, and there's even been a couple of firmware updates, but I just need a more reliable camera, and that's why I shoot with the Panasonic GH3, because it gets the job done every single time and it's never overheated once. So this next question is from Mario Visions, and he's asking if I ever use any gimbals. He says, I feel like I haven't seen any gimbal reviews on your channel. I do a lot of shots handheld with the GH5, but the Ronin M is beast. Just wondering what your take is on gimbals and glide cams. So yeah, I actually, my history with shooting weddings, I shot all the weddings that I did with glide cams, and I only recently started getting more into gimbals. I had the Zhiyun Crane M and the Zhiyun Smooth Q, which that was just an iPhone gimbal, so maybe that doesn't count. But just recently I did a review on the Home Tech iSteady, which I'll put a link to that video right up there. But yeah, I definitely like using gimbals. They're really convenient, and it's way easier to just get the shot the first time as opposed to having to go back and do a bunch of retakes. So gimbals are really nice. I've never used any of the DJI Ronin systems, but I would love to someday. The iSteady gear one that I have is pretty good. I like it. It can hold some pretty heavy cameras. Yeah, I hope to get my hands on some other gimbals in the future and do more reviews on different gimbals, but hopefully ones that are not gonna break the bank too much. So this question I actually like a lot. It's from Rookie Blue 32. Very short and sweet question, but if I'm on a budget, should I invest the majority of my funds on the camera body or the lens? Now, that's a really good question, and I've mentioned this before in my videos, but I would definitely say that spending more money on the lens is a way better route to go. You can get a cheaper camera, like this GH3 that I'm using was made back in 2012, but if you put a really good lens on there, you can still get away with it and it'll look great. So I would definitely say spend as much money as you possibly can on a lens, because a great lens on a older camera body is gonna look way better than a super cheap lens on a really good camera body. So yeah, invest as much as you can on your lens, and the fact that you have maybe an older camera body won't be as noticeable. All right, so this question is from David Longenecker, and he's asking what I think about the BMCC 4K, the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4K, and honestly, I think it's awesome. The footage that I've seen from it looks really good. The camera obviously isn't a pocket camera anymore. That thing is huge. I had the original pocket camera, and even that camera, even though it was small, you had to rig it out so much just in order to like make it work. So I like Blackmagic, but their cameras are never really that ergonomic, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm definitely probably gonna end up picking it up. Probably not till next year though. So this question is by Alturismo, and he's asking what other camera I would recommend besides the G7, because the G7 and the G7 is too expensive and the G6 just isn't available where he's from. So if you're looking to stay in the Panasonic system, I would say look into the GH3 or the GH2, or if you really want to save some money, the GH1. You have to hack the GH1 and the GH2 to make them better video cameras, but they're still really good cameras. And I'm rocking the GH3 right now, which can be had like for 300 bucks, at least here in the US. So, you know, the older GH line is still really good as long as you can find them in good condition, and they can produce some really nice looking images. Just make sure you get some good lenses to go with them, because like I always say, a bad lens on any camera is gonna make the footage look absolutely horrible. So yeah, those are the ones that I would look into. If you wanna go to like Sony, maybe the Sony A6000, if you can work around the audio issues. But yeah, the GH series is what I would recommend if you want to stay in the Panasonic game. So this question is by All and Everything, and they're looking for a camera under $700, and they're wondering between the SL2, the G7, or the Sony A6000. I would definitely pick the G7 out of those three. It's going to give you the best image quality, shoots 4K, has a mic jack, and I think that if you go into the Panasonic system and you get lenses and accessories for the G7, you can easily swap up to the G85 or like, you know, the G9 or the GH5 or whatever, and the lenses and, you know, a lot of the accessories that you're gonna get are gonna, you know, cross over. So I would go with the G7 out of those three. Like, I still think that's probably one of the best cameras you can get right now for the price. Even if you don't want to shoot in 4K, the 1080p is still amazing, and you get flat picture profiles and a mic jack and a flip out screen. So I'd say look into the G7. So this question is from QR Wasuper. Again, I'm sorry about these names. Do you recommend using a gimbal with old manual lenses? I love my 28 and my 50mm FD. I just wonder how it will work and pair with the gimbal. I definitely think you can. Tighter focal lengths are going to be a little bit harder to work with on gimbals because you'll see more of the shake, but if you have a camera that, you know, has in-body image stabilization, it won't be that big of an issue. But I always like to shoot as wide as I can with lenses on a gimbal, and just make sure that you stop the aperture down so that the focus isn't going to go in and out of whatever you're filming. You know, just make it a deep depth of field, and, you know, instead of a shallow one, so that you don't have to be super critical with your focus going in and out. So this question is by Wallravel, and he says, what do you think about a format in which you give us tips and analysis of our videos, and what do you think about the Panasonic 7 to 14mm lens? I think that would be really cool if you think that would be a cool thing to do, where you send me videos and I kind of give you tips and, you know, some tricks on how to make them better. Let me know. I'll put a poll somewhere up here, and you can let me know if that's, you know, something that you'd be interested in. And as far as the 7 to 14, I think it's an awesome lens, but it's really slow and it's really expensive for what it is. So that's why I've never bought it. But it's a great quality lens. So if you're looking for that super wide, almost fisheye field of view, and you can deal with the fact that it's slow and you want to pay that much for it, then go for it. Framing's probably off. There's people walking around here. Sorry about that. There's like people walking through my shot. All right, so this last question is from Achi Pop. So he says, hey man, I was thinking of getting the Canon EOS M and installing Magic Lantern on it. What would you think of it being a cheap, take anywhere cinema camera for someone new to cinematography like me? Yeah, I definitely think that the EOS M is, you know, totally a capable camera if you just want to, like, you know, have it as like a B cam, or just like, you know, like a walk anywhere, take anywhere kind of camera. It's not going to give you the sharpest image, but if you get Magic Lantern and maybe even CineStyle installed on there, although someone told me that CineStyle is no longer free, so I'd maybe look into like Vision Color or something like that. I think that's only like 10 bucks. But yeah, I mean, it's still a pretty fun camera to mess around with. I know a few people who still make videos with the EOS M, and as long as you get a sharp enough lens on there, you can still get footage that is totally usable for YouTube stuff. I mean, it has the T4i sensor in it, so I mean, to say that it's not good enough for YouTube stuff, I mean, you know, Simon Cade from DSLR Guide uses the T3i for all of his videos, and he's still making awesome content. So I mean, as long as you get a good sharp lens on there, it's still totally a usable camera. So that's all the questions that I'm going to answer in this video. Thank you to everyone who submitted these questions in, and be sure to tune in next time. And you can click right over here to check out some more of my videos, and I'll have links in the description and a bunch of gear that I use and recommend, as well as links to my Selfie, Patreon, and Teespring account. Thank you so much for watching. Later.